Hi, this is Dan Harris, and welcome to the Ironbird Podcast. On today's episode, we have Ben Klein. He's the CEO of Aero. On the episode, we talked about how Ben went from pilot to attorney to the general counsel of Aero and then to CEO. We also discussed how he still flies the airplane, its safety, and all things experience with Aero. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you. Ben, we'll start with our first question here about timing and how Aero started. Now, I know it started around COVID, and that had its own struggles. Do you want to jump into how you dealt with the COVID time of early COVID, no travel, and then how that may have transitioned your business into what it is now?
Sure, absolutely. We launched in the U.S. in early 2021. Mm-hmm. That was our first operational year here. So we were already sort of outside of early COVID at that point. And we were in that period where, frankly, as you know, there were a lot of tailwinds for private aviation. I think it's, well documented that there was a surge of growth in private aviation during COVID. And so our timing in that regard was frankly pretty good. We did build the business, of course, before we launched it, right? So as you know, when you start any air carrier, there's a long ramp up process of acquiring the aircraft, hiring post holders. And that was challenging during early COVID with, uncertain funding environment, uncertain everything. Yeah. I'd say another silver lining of that piece, though, was that early COVID had, the asset values kind of came down a little bit, very briefly. Yeah. Right. And
before they skyrocketed.
And we were able to take advantage of that as well in some of our acquisitions.
Interesting.
So, I think that COVID obviously presented a bunch of challenges, personally, professionally for everybody involved. But in terms of private aviation, we timed it pretty well, I think, for when we launched. Now, once we were operating, then there's all the sort of operational challenges of dealing with, mask mandates. And even once mandates were gone, you have guests who have different preferences about whether or not masks should be worn. Yeah. And so there were those challenges that we all faced in the aviation business, whether it was commercial airlines or on the private side of things. But we navigated them, and I think starting when we did was probably pretty helpful.
How many airplanes did they purchase right out of the gate?
So, I joined in 2021. And at that point, we had a legacy here in the U.S., and there were a couple ERJs that were undergoing refurbishment. So when we buy the ERJ 135s, they're typically configured like regional jets. Okay. And we go through a pretty extensive retrofit process.
Wow. So you take a 30-seat, it's
37
seat regional airliner, and then you completely what's that process look like?
Lengthy, and expensive, But and the initial ones took longer, obviously, because we had our partners had to get STCs. So we're taking out 37 seats. We're reinstalling 16 all first class leather seats. We dropped the floor because in the 135 there's the sort of sunken aisle, and our floor is flat to give more headroom. We take out the overhead bins. We have suede walls for soundproofing. A very high-end sound system. So anytime you do extensive work on an airplane, especially the first time you do it, because of the regulatory approvals and the STC process, it takes a while. And that's why we launched with that legacy, because we were able to sort of get going right away with that platform until those ERJs were able to come on onto the ticket. So now that we've gone through our first, the process is quicker.
Let's go just to touch base about your background. You learned to fly at age 12, right?
I took my first flying lesson at age 12.
Okay. Yeah. What drove you into aviation?
I get asked that question a lot, and I don't remember. I can't remember a time I didn't love airplanes. There must have been something, and I will say this. So my father, I would say there's two kinds of people, right? One, you can ask them when they get off a commercial flight, what airplane were you on? And half people will tell you exactly what it was, and half the people will have no idea. My father was somebody who knew, right? So he paid attention. He had that interest in airplanes, which I think a lot of people have. When my father was born, he took his first commercial airplane flight when he was already old. It was a novelty. And so that novelty sort of remained, and I think that's probably where the seed was planted. But from a very young age, I was pestering my parents to take flying lessons. And I remember I would strategically place copies of Flying Magazine around and really, I was relentless.
Yeah.
And they gave in when I was 12 for my, it was a birthday present. It was one lesson, right? It was, and I still have, I've got my logbook. It was like 0.6 of dual at Baltimore Air Park in a Cessna 150. And I remember every minute of it.
Really?
And then I did that once a year. That was like the birthday present I would ask for.
Yep.
And then when I was 16, I really started, pursuing training, and I got my private before I graduated high school.
And how did you decide between flying or becoming an attorney? How does that work?
I don't think that I didn't decide to go to law school until after I graduated college. So that wasn't the decision I was sort of faced with. I was just trying to figure out, like, I think a lot of young people, I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to do. I did think about going into the airlines. As you know, it's a really cyclical business, and it just so happened when I was graduating high school and in college, it was the times where you hear the stories of regional pilots, making 18 grand a year. It wasn't what it is today.
Yeah,
and so I think that probably caused me to, look for other options at the time.
Do you think your parents were happy that you decided to be an attorney?
It's funny. I didn't want to play. I mean, if you really get down to it, it's probably, my parents wanted me to be like a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right. and there was that I was discouraged from pursuing flying as a career, and of course I'm my own person, so that's I'm not going to lay it all on that.
Yeah.
But I'm the older son, so I aim to please. So I probably was influenced on that regard.
Do you see any parallels between being an attorney and being a pilot?
Yeah, actually I do, especially, so I was a litigator for most of my career. And I think a lot of the similarities are just dealing with, a lot of information coming in at once, dealing with and processing it, right? I think there's a lot of similar things that go on in a cockpit that do in a courtroom. And it's also, there's certain people who enjoy that, who enjoy sort of putting control around what can be chaotic situations. And I think I do gravitate to those kinds of activities.
What about being a CEO?
What about it?
How do you compare it of being a litigator, a pilot, and then what are the differences that, you think maybe what are the similarities between it? And then maybe what are some of the differences that you see now that you've become a CEO?
I think that, so I spent almost 20 years as a lawyer before I moved into a non-legal position, which I was thinking about the other day as a really long time. But my transition was, I came to Aero in order to be involved in the business. I didn't come just to be a lawyer, right? I was excited about joining because, I'm an aviation nut.
Yep.
And I wanted to contribute to the business as a whole and to the decision-making that happened. So, I think the evolution from being GC to CEO was a pretty easy one. Easy is the wrong word. It was natural. There was a lot to learn, obviously. I needed to lean on a lot of people. We have a great executive team at Aero who are real partners and sort of helped me through that transition. But in terms of similarities, again, it's a CEO, a litigator, a pilot. You're in the decision-making business, right? And it's about judgment. And I certainly think that, being a lawyer, especially being a litigator, is a great way to build that skill of exercising judgment in difficult situations and processing information on the fly. There's probably more overlap than I've spent time thinking about.
When did you first learn about Aero?
Early. Yeah. So I know the former CEO, Uma Subramanian. I was actually working with her at a different company when the idea of Aero was sort of being developed with our founder, Garrett Camp, who's the co-founder of Uber. I can say like I was there when it was an idea, and from a distance watched it get built. And then after, I was GC at another company, and Uma gave me a call in 2021 and said, "Hey, we're looking for a GC," and I jumped.
The founder Garrett has done aviation projects before. Is he just love aviation? What's in it that he keeps taking another smack at this thing?
I think so. I mean, I think he loves aviation, but I also Garrett's a problem solver, right? Uber solved a problem for all of us. I mean, I was thinking about. I'm a recent transplant to LA, and I was thinking about how Uber sort of remade the city, right? I remember coming to LA because my brothers lived here for a while before Uber, and it was a challenge, right? Getting around,
taxis
were terrible.
Yep.
And so Uber solved the problem, and I think that what Garrett sees and saw when he created Aero was a gap that existed between what you can get in first class in the commercial world and the pure charter on demand world. And so he wanted to create a product to fill that gap. And I think we all identify, those of us who've worked in this industry for a while, things that can be better and ways that we can do what we do better. And that's ultimately who Garrett is as an entrepreneur and a founder. So
how is he to work with?
Great. Garrett is, we have a small board.
Yep.
We're all sort of pretty involved. On the other hand, Garrett knows where his expertise lies.
Yeah.
And for example, design. Garrett is passionate about design. And that's why the Aero is the beautiful product that it is, from our website to our airplanes to our pilots and flight attendants' uniforms. So I think, he definitely, it's his vision.
When you took over as CEO, did you have, let's say, 3 things that you wanted to accomplish or tackle?
Yeah, I mean, one was just setting out sort of a long-term strategic plan for where we were going to take the business. Like I said, we launched in the U.S. in 2021. There's a lot of just, when you launch in air carriers, as I discussed, there's just a lot of stuff you've got to do to get going. And you tend to pay more attention at that point to tactics, right, than bigger strategy. And where we were when I took over was, I think, really needed to sort of reset what our strategy was. And we have a few products at Aero. One is, and we'll get into this, right, is our SemiPrivate scheduled service.
Yep.
We also fly a pure on-demand charter. We have another thing I'll talk about we call Aero Private. So it was really sort of laying out the plan for how we were going to balance between these 3 products going forward. The second thing was making sure we launched here in LA. We have a fabulous, loyal guest base here, and I really wanted to double down on that and pursue growth opportunities from our LA base, which we've done. And then really just sort of getting the team to the place where we were all on the same page in terms of what that vision was, and so we could march forward.
What do you think drives the demand of the semi-private space? Do you think, is it because commercial is so terrible and private is so expensive that there's that gap between the two?
I think that's a big piece of it, right? The commercial experience, it doesn't matter if you're flying first class on Qatar Airways in a Q Suite. You still have to go through the painful process of getting to the airport, going through security. And that's a process on both ends of your trip, right? That is something that we were able to eliminate with a semi-private model. So that's a big piece, especially for trips that are in that 2 to 3 hour spot, because in that case, that airport piece of your journey can be just as long, if not longer, than the flying part. When you're talking about a 16-hour trip, the airport piece sort of starts to fall away as a percentage of the overall pain, right? But for that 2 to 3 hour trip, I think semi-private fits really well. So I think that's it, because that's a piece. Private on demand is out of a lot of people's reach. So to be able to provide the same, if not better experience, and I do think we provide an equal, if not better experience to almost any private operation you would find, for a fraction of the cost, is really appealing. And I think that is, private has grown a lot, right? Grew a lot in COVID. I think there's still growth there, but I don't want to say we've reached saturation, but there's a limit to where that market's going to be given the cost. I think what we're doing is new territory, and I think it's there's a big market there to go after.
Well, let's dive into the experience. What do you think really differentiates Aero between maybe other semi-private? And maybe you can also correlate to, you mentioned that you think it maybe even rivals some private experiences. So what do you think what makes Aero experience like really great for customers?
I mean, it's our dedication to providing, an unreasonable level of service and hospitality, right? And it's a program that we've really deliberately put into place a couple years ago. We knew out of the gate we had something great, right?
Yep.
Cool looking airplanes, fly out of the private terminal, avoiding everything that we discussed. But we also knew that we wanted to layer on something on top of that to really make it a one-of-a-kind experience. And so we very deliberately approached building out our entire, what we call our experience platform. It starts with a concierge team that we have that answers the phone 24/7. You'll get a human every time you call.
You don't even find that in a lot of private operators.
Exactly. So that's why I say, and we used to have this saying in pitch decks, 80% of the private experience for 20% of the cost. But I wanted to nix that because over and over again, and it's not just because of what I believe, right? And obviously I'm proud of what we've built, but we hear from our own guests who have jet cards, who have their own airplanes, this is better than private. When you guys go where I want to go, I'm going to fly Aero. And again, so to get back of how we built that, it was this investment into, so concierge, start your journey with Aero. When you arrive at our terminal, we have a host team that's there to check you in right at curbside. We have Airwan snacks and food in our own lounge that we've built out.
Do you have a favorite snack that you really like?
I like popcorn a lot.
Okay.
And I like to eat the popcorn. I will say, as an Aero employee, popcorn's a problem because it gets all over the floor. And I am also a very messy popcorn eater, and I watch myself shove it into my mouth and it falls over the floor. But it's delicious. Also the croissants. We get fresh baked Aero croissants every morning. Nice. Also messy, but very good. And we serve Veuve Clicquot, and during the holidays we do chips and caviar. So and our lounge has a different feel from an FBO. I mean, there's some very nice FBO lounges, but we've really built out something personal where our guests feel at home. They get to know our hosts and our teammates. And so there's just a little bit more of a warmer atmosphere, I would say. And then you get onto the airplane, and I said we spent a lot of time building out the physical, but also the experiences where we've invested a lot. Our flight attendants are trained by the British Butler Institute, really to deliver a high level of service. Our meals are catered by Airwan. We change the menu every quarter.
Oh, wow.
And we spend a lot of time picking options that we think will appeal to our wide range of guests, from kids. There's I eat the kids' meal, which is a turkey slider, and vegetarian and gluten-free options, and a wine and a beverage program. Our wine list was curated by Wally's here in Beverly Hills. So, again, this was something very deliberate that we built, and we've had to refine. You don't get it right out of the gate when it comes to experience either.
Was there something that didn't land very well with passengers?
Well, when we first started flying, we didn't have a meal service. We served snacks. And we definitely heard about that. I'm paying a lot of money to get a bag of gummy bears or whatever it is. And so, we knew we had to provide something more, and we did. And even now, once we built our menu, we actively solicit post-flight surveys. We get a pretty good response rate. People will tell us, why'd you stop serving the breakfast burrito? Why are you serving this? And I mean, I read every one of them, and our experience team reads them closely, and we adapt. And as a result, we've gone from, an NPS in the high 70s in 2022, which, by the way, is pretty good. For the
That's
industry,
a good Net Promoter Score.
To an average of 94 this year.
Wow.
And that's just being relentless about experience. And we want our guests to feel like the Aero part of their journey is just as good as wherever they're going.
Yeah. In the semi-private space, we saw one of the larger providers, SetJet, close their doors. What do you think is the challenges of being in this space? Is it the cost of owning and operating airplanes? Is it demand? What do you see as the biggest challenges of being in the semi-private space?
Well, first, I think I'd say that I think there's challenges of being in aviation, period. Okay? So starting at any air carrier, whether it's a Part 121 airline or a 135 on demand or a semi-private. This is a hard business.
Yep.
You know that. You've got to mind the till. Nickels and dimes matter.
Yeah.
And so, that's the challenge that everybody who tries to build an aviation business faces.
You got to deal with pilots. They're a pain in the ass, right?
But no, I mean, listen, we have the same challenges that others do as well. Semi-private in particular, I guess the challenges there are you're educating people about a new market, frankly, that hasn't existed very long, a new product, let's say, and getting awareness out there about what semi-private is.
Yeah.
Even just figuring out the language to use. I mean, I'm going to look at our head of marketing. How you talk about this in order to convey what we're doing isn't easy.
Yeah.
We defaulted to semi-private because it's kind of.
Is semi-private the right word, or should we be using something different?
We've gone. I mean, I'm told to use semi-private, so I will.
I think semi-private is a good ring to it, right?
It's good, but does it convey? I don't think you can say semi-private alone, and your average person out there is going to know, oh, that means I can book by the seat, and it's a scheduled route, and that. They're like, oh, does that mean it's a shared charter, that we're all crowdsourcing? Because there's a lot of different things happening in this space. Yeah. So
I love the crowdsourcing. That's something that I'm very interested on, of that crowdsourcing. I see a lot of the times, I always see when I track different routes, and Cabo being one of them, because I think Cabo is a great space, and I think it makes sense why you're in that space. I'll see a NetJets airplane and then a FlexJet airplane take off almost right behind each other, and the average load is about 25%.
Yeah.
So I'll know that theoretically they could have crowdsourced either. They both maybe flew in a Longitude or Challenger 300. They could have crowdsourced a larger airplane, call it a Gulfstream 450 or a Legacy 600. They could have had more space in the cabin, more luggage capacity, and then lowered their costs if they actually were able to crowdsource together.
Yeah. And
or if they only had two people, they could probably take a semi-private airplane as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, we are doing it's not crowdsourced, but we're aggregating private demand for that product into a larger aircraft.
Yep.
Again, providing that same experience. And I think that what people don't often realize is that there is a sort of a social component to what we do that also, some people, I don't want to be with anyone else. That's the natural instinct. But I think that, where I get excited and is when I'm flying and I'm, if I'm looking in the back and people are starting to chat and sit on the armrests and talk to each other, it's community building.
Yeah.
And so, I think crowdsourcing is a great option, and what we do provides sort of the same experience.
You're currently still a pilot, correct?
Yes.
And you still fly on the line?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a line holder, but I do fly trips. Yeah.
So how much are you currently flying right now on average?
I try and fly about once a week.
Yeah.
It varies based on what I'm doing. I did just relocate to LA, so it's a lot easier for me to fly more. I love it. Selfishly, I do it because I love it.
Yep.
But I also do think that being out there in the field gives me a unique insight into the business, to some of the challenges our employees face, to what our guests are looking for. That is helpful and that I can bring to my role as a leader.
One of the questions we receive a lot when I was talking with current Aero clients, one, they love the service, but another one was, they asked about safety. They go, how safe is Aero? How would you answer if someone asked, is Aero safe?
Well, I'd say, our motto is safety always. It's our first and highest value at Aero. And how have we put that into practice? Our director of safety is from the 121 world. We have 121 level safety programs that we've instituted, things that aren't required under the Part 135 world at all. Examples of that include, we have a full safety management system, which will be required soon by the FAA, but isn't currently today. We participate in an ASAP program, which allows our pilots to make reports about issues that happen that we can all learn from openly. It's what we encourage a just culture of talking about issues that we face.
And that's one thing that culture of being able to report things and then not get retaliatory actions, right?
Absolutely.
Because in a lot of places, if you're a pilot on a 135 and you're flying a lot, if you report something that may hurt the business or slow down the business, usually there could be retaliatory action from the company, and then that stops a lot of pilots from actually reporting these things, right?
Yeah, and absolutely. And what we've tried to build, again, through this just culture is the exact opposite environment. And again, a lot of people in our leadership are pilots, right? So it's not just me, it's our CFO, obviously our SVP of Ops, who's also our DO, our Director of Safety, both former 121 pilots. So we understand the challenges. Yeah. And we want to create that environment, again, where it's a learning environment. So there's ASAP. We also have FOQA, which is onboard sensors that monitor 170 or 80 flight parameters every second, that provide reports after every flight about, whether or not, someone was below glide slope, or again, things you can learn from that don't exist in most of the 135 world. This is a 121 kind of program, again, that is, we're always trying to improve. And then, I'll say we fly into some challenging airports, including Aspen. There's a lot of operators out there, as you know, who will get an Aspen trip and just blast in there. That's not how we approach it, nor do I think that's how anybody should approach it. All of our pilots go into the simulator every time they go for reoccurrent training to do one day of Aspen specific training.
Wow, just a full day dedicated to
Aspen. A
Aspen.
full day dedicated to Aspen.
Wow.
And that's, half the time spent on procedure, half the time 4 hours in the sim. Again, every time we do recurrent. That's how seriously we take operating into what is a challenging airport. And again, I think it's just more evidence of our dedication to safety and to living our value of safety always. So to answer your question, I'd say, is Aero safe? I mean, nothing's perfectly safe in this world, but we do everything we can to mitigate risk to the same level as commercial, 121 carriers.
For clients that are either flying commercial and private, and we'll probably take this one at a time. For someone that's currently flying first class, what is the pitch, or how do you say, hey, here's the real difference, and here's the advantages of flying Aero or semi-private versus first class?
I mean, I think a big part of it is you avoid the airport. And this is going to give you a private experience, again, for a price that is oftentimes competitive with first class. So I think a lot of it is that education, because people will automatically assume, oh, this is going to be out of my reach. Yep. And so we want to let them know, this is what you're going to pay to go to Aspen and high season. And, our pricing is not that far off that for really a radically different experience. If you have a pet, right? You can bring your pet much easier than you can on a commercial airline.
Especially a large pet, right?
Especially a large, exactly. And we fly some large dogs, and we're happy to do that. I mean, that's a big benefit to the private and semi-private experience. I think, as we mentioned before we went on, people traveling with kids. Airport experience is can be very unpleasant with little kids. I spent many years doing it, and I have these dark circles under my eyes because of it. And so just removing a lot of the obstacles and anxiety associated with travel, again, for just a fraction of that, the price of private.
And what would you say to someone that is an on-demand charter or airplane owner or fractional client that flies privately? What's the advantages to then taking the semi-private on the routes that you provide?
There, I would say, give us a try. I think you will be very surprised by the level of experience that you get, which again, I think you'll find exceeds what you're used to in the private world, or at least matches. And you're going to pay a fraction, again, of the price. So it's a slightly different pitch, because I think for the private folks, they're not necessarily convinced that they're going to have the same experience,
right? Yeah.
But I think, again, I mean, we hear it over and over and over again. It's the number one comment we get is just as good as private. So the pitch would be, when we're going, if you want to go to Cabo, if you want to go to Aspen, or if you want to go to Sun Valley, give us a try. I think you'll be very surprised, and we have a lot of return guests.
And another feedback I get is, when are you adding more destinations?
Well, we will be adding more soon. Again, we want we've sort of doubled down on our LA base this year, and we will announce new routes shortly out of LA. But again, we're very deliberate in the way we do build new routes. We want to make sure we have the right partnerships in place. When we do that there's sufficient demand for the kind of product we're flying. I mean, not every route is going to be conducive to a semi-private, regular scheduled service.
Yep.
So, as the CEO, I need to be sure that the economics are going to work when you do it. We get a lot of people who say, well, if you only flew to Whitefish, I promise you'd fill the airplane. I'm like, well, if you really want to promise and,
you can charter it if you really want to. Right?
Yeah. But I think there are a ton of compelling routes out of LA. We have a lot of room to run with this. And
you've tried a couple ones, right? You've tried, was it Napa? You've tried Jackson Hole. I get a lot of Jackson Hole people ask me about it.
Yeah, we get a lot of requests for Jackson. Our number one most requested route is New York, believe it or not. Van Nuys,
really?
New York.
And can that airplane, the way it's configured now, could you do a nonstop New York with that airplane?
Not with the ERJ.
Yeah.
With the Legacy you could, but not with the ERJ.
So what's the difference between the ERJ and the Legacy? Because technically they're the same tube, right?
Yes. I mean, there's some differences in terms of soundproofing, but our ERJ is configured with 16 forward-facing seats. The Legacy is configured like a typical
a VIP configured.
VIP. There's the conference table.
Yeah, it's a typical 13-seat. You have 4 separate seats, a 4-person conference, and then a divan with 2 seats in the rear.
Exactly. And so we use that for mostly charter. When we launched, we did use that for the scheduled service. I think as we grow, we will look for new platforms to use for longer routes.
But what's the technical difference between the two airplanes? Are they?
The only real is fuel. So the Legacy holds a lot more fuel, which gives it longer legs. There's some other. It's really mostly around the fuel tanks. Otherwise, it's the same type rating. There's minor differences training involved.
That actually goes into my next question with airplanes: the ERJ, the Legacy. How was that airplane initially purchased, and then going forward, do you stay with that platform, or do you think you're going to move into a different airplane type?
How was the airplane purchased?
Yeah, why did they pick the ERJ?
Well, I think it was a compelling acquisition cost.
Yeah,
you can have a private product for a fraction of the price of a private jet, even including the retrofit. It's a workhorse.
Yeah.
It was designed for the regionals.
Yeah.
And it's proven to be that for us. It's a very sturdy platform. A lot of part availability.
Yeah.
And there's a pretty big fleet out there that still has some life left in it.
So you probably have got access to pilots and training slots as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's training's getting a little more difficult as the fleet, as there's less of them out there. And we obviously have people in this space who are also flying that airplane, and so we compete for that for those training slots. But in terms of future growth, I love the Embraer product. I think that the 135 is really good for that 2 to 3.5 hour flight. So I think we will continue to have those in our fleet, even as we launch new routes and as we launch new origin markets. I think it could work in a lot of places, but I do think that there's going to be a need to add a new type that will give us those longer legs to do routes that we know there's a high demand for.
Vegas?
Well, Vegas you can do in the ERJ.
Yep.
But
is that when I look at the numbers of the top destinations, Vegas is number 1 for private.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of competition in that space, right? When you were selecting the routes, and as you continue to decide, was Vegas? It had to be a consideration, right?
Yeah. Well, I will say Vegas. Vegas still is a consideration, and I'll just say openly, I think Vegas is a route you'll see us probably fly later this year.
Yeah.
But what we initially looked for, again, we wanted to be sure, as you know, in this business, if you go out and start flying airplanes that don't have the loads you need, you are going to be very quickly.
It's going to cost you a lot of money.
Yep. So we look for routes where we had like a competitive advantage right away. Aspen's an obvious one. There's just not a lot of direct flights there. As again, the way we've configured the airplane, we can operate in and out of there. And there's a ton of second homeowners in the not only LA but like the Van Nuys general region who are traveling frequently to Aspen, and that's proven to be a great route. Cabo, a little bit different in that there's a lot of competition, But on the other hand, there's also, again, you have that same demographic of a lot of second homeowners going back and forth. There's a huge, I mean, Cabo is kind of little LA.
It is. I say Cabo is to LA the way, Miami and Fort Lauderdale are to New York and Boston.
That's exactly
right.
It's
a very big second home destination, 2 hours-ish to go to warmer weather. And we should be surprised that people in LA need to do that, but it's that perfect kind of New York, Florida, similar route.
Yes. And
it's a top 10. If you actually look at the top 10 destinations out of Los Angeles, it's a top 10 route when you combine the two airports together.
CSL and SJD?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me. Now, there's a lot of commercial traffic into Cabo. So, we have to present our value prop a little bit differently on that route. A lot of that is, as you know, if you've flown into Cabo commercially, it can be a real nightmare on the customs side of things, hours on both ends.
And I got in a bus last time I landed into Cabo because they didn't have enough terminal slots. So we landed and they moved us from the airplane onto a hot ramp, onto a bus, and then into a long customs line.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if you're going to your second home for a 3-day weekend, that 2-3 hours you're saving on both, on your inbound and your outbound really matters. And I think that's why that's proven to be a successful route for us.
When you looked at both Cabo airports, how did you decide one Cabo airport versus the other one?
I think we sometimes fly into CSL also, and we actually for a while had regular service into CSL. Just for our guests, the demand was mostly into SJD, and I think that's by virtue of where they're going once they get there. If you're going, more to the, up to the sort
San
of Costa
Jose.
Palmas area, to San Jose del Cabo. I mean, CSL is very inconvenient.
But you look at the Palmilla is almost in the middle. So it almost doesn't matter either way. If you look at like El Dorado is a little bit more south. That's a little bit better going into.
I think part of it's the airport experience also.
Yep.
You can have a little bit more of the experience that we want to offer our guests at SJD.
Yep.
We have a good partnership with the FBO there. So there's a bunch of things that went into it, but for us, we see our guests, the most of demand is for the SJD.
How do you balance that seasonal demand, and then how do you handle a lot of the empty leg flying? Typical. I mean, I think the empty leg flying is a big problem for the whole industry, as people tend to fly, to Aspen or Cabo on that Thursday, Friday, back on that Sunday, Monday. How do you balance that empty leg, non-demand, or those empty seats on your flights?
I mean, I will say, so there's definitely seasonality and there's directionality.
Yeah,
for sure. But on certain routes in Aspen, the directionality thing has, I don't want to say it's disappeared, but it's gotten less. We can see fairly equal loads on a Thursday, both in and out of Aspen.
Wow, that's great.
And I think that's because, again, there's a lot of, with people working remotely now more, a lot of our guests are second homeowners. It's not necessarily just about a weekend. And as awareness has grown of what we're offering, again, we're seeing a little bit more of a balance there, which is great. But the real way we handle is we just have to price accordingly, right? We know what our loads are going to be roughly, whether that's distributed, all on one leg as opposed to the other. And to be successful as a business, we need to charge a certain price to make sure that we're making money when we fly that route. And so we look really closely at it, and it evolves over time. And then to answer about seasonality, we just decrease frequency.
Yep.
So we're coming into a period where Cabo is going to get slower. Every summer seems to be a little bit different in terms of the traffic you'll get in August.
Yep. I am seeing more and more demand into Cabo over these months than I ever have seen before.
Yeah, I think it's become that way. And in Aspen you'll get with November is pretty quiet. They close the airport in May, and so in those times the good news is Cabo and Aspen sort of run opposite each other. So you'll get May is still strong for Cabo. And even April this year, because it was warm, Aspen kind of quieted down and Cabo was really strong.
Yep.
And then So the SemiPrivate is one piece of our puzzle. We're also a charter operator. We operate all of our aircraft also on charter, and we'll do more in those seasons that are shoulder seasons.
How do you talked about it and you just mentioned it, the charter. How do you manage the three different phases of your business of SemiPrivate, charter, and then you kind of mentioned a third part of the business, right?
How do we balance it?
Yeah.
I think we look closely at demand, at what we think we can, what capacity is warranted on the scheduled side of things during any given month, and then what is that's the priority, right? And then if we think there's good demand there, and then we look at the capacity we have, and we'll put that out for charter. Charter's grown as a piece of our business. For sure. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we've dedicated the legacy to charter for a long time now. But what we found recently is the ERJ is also a pretty compelling platform for certain guests.
Yeah.
We're doing a pretty good business in rock bands touring. It's a great product for tours because you get 16 forward-facing seats, which everybody may think they'd prefer a 16-seat G550, but if you're on the sofa,
and you're side facing on takeoff and landing
for 2 months on the road, that's probably less ideal for that person. Also, the hold on the ERJ is massive. Again, it's designed to be a regional. You can fit 70 bags in there. It's bigger than a global.
I think it's I think a Gulfstream has 167 cubic feet. And the Legacy has 225 or 27, I think.
And that's the Legacy.
That's the Legacy.
And the ERJ has at least double that because there's a whole section.
Is that because of the fuel tanks?
Exactly. There's the whole, and that's where the Legacy has those longer legs. There's a whole section that the ERJ devotes to baggage as opposed to fuel. So again, we've developed that market. There's a lot more awareness about it now, and so that segment of the business is growing.
Yeah.
And then there's Aero Private, which is I think a pretty unique product that we offer, and it's the best way to describe it is sort of like cost sharing for private for private events. So I'll give you an example. There's a bank that has a big conference every year in Jackson Hole, and they used to charter 4 ERJs and just fly all their guests out there. And then they decided, we don't want to pay for these guests. It's expensive. We want them to pay. And they knew that their guests would pay. They wanted the private experience. But how do they get that by-the-seat product to their guests? They could say, we're going to pay and Venmo us or something. That's cumbersome. Yeah. What we are able to do because of the way we're structured as a semi-private business is we go out, for that event, and they give us their guest list, meaning the bank gives us their guest list, and then we go and sell by the seat to their guest list.
And you provide maybe an online platform for someone to go in and purchase a seat?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the online piece of it's being developed. Right now it's a little more, goes to our concierge. Yep. But very shortly we'll have an online platform where if you have the correct code, you'll go on and you'll see, Van Nuys Jackson Hole as the option for those dates, and you'll buy a seat. So that's actually proven to be very popular for, again, these kind of conferences, weddings. We've done a couple weddings this way where people wanted their guests to have a high-end way to get to, Punta Mita. Yep. And so instead of, again, going through that, well, I'll pay for the charter and you guys just pay me back per seat, we take care of all that. So that's a new sort of area that we've grown into.
That's interesting. The large party charter is really a difficult space. Yeah. Because the options are, like you said, you can jam 15 people in a G550 very uncomfortably, or you can charter a 30-seat, Dornier that's not maybe very luxurious, or you can charter a 19-seat BBJ that's going to be incredibly expensive. Or then you have to get into some of the Boeings, and those get even more and more expensive. So that 16-seat, I think it's above 12, which, 12 to 13, you see most Gulfstreams. Anything above 12 gets very difficult. Yeah. And that 12 to 16, I think, is a great space for weddings, events, all these things where it's really difficult in the 135 charter space to really fit that gap, where that ERJ, that 16-seat ERJ probably fits perfectly, and
it's also, we can price it really competitively.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, the ERJ just is cheaper than the Legacy, right? or any Gulfstream.
Or
So
550.
The bang for your buck you're getting is really quite high.
What are some of the future plans, do you think, for Aero? Obviously, you talked about route growth. What are some of the other things that you're looking forward to in the future that you can see Aero grow into?
I think we're going to continue to expand the charter piece of the business. We're going to add new aircraft to enable us to do more varied on-demand flying. And I think in time we will launch new origin markets and continue to build the sort of from the successful model that we've established here in LA. We really again wanted to spend the time to sort of perfect that. And I think we're basically there. And then so taking that same model, and I think there's certainly a few other cities in the U.S. that lend itself very well to what we've built here in LA. And I think we can go into those cities, fly to a lot of the same destinations that we do here. For example, we know there's a lot of demand for Aspen from New York. There is no direct service. There's a lot of demand for Aspen from South Florida. And so I think
what about that New York, South Florida route? That seems to be a popular.
It's a very popular route, and there's others that do it. I'm pretty confident we could do it better. But I think that there's a lot of demand out east that we haven't really explored yet.
If people want to get on an Aero airplane, what's the best way for them to book a seat or learn more about it?
Easiest way is our website, aero.com. We spent a lot of time making sure it's a seamless booking process on the website. You'll get information about where we fly, information about our partners, a lot of great partners that we work with, Four Seasons and Costas Palmas, Waldorf and Cabo, Hotel Jerome, and you can book your ticket. If you're more comfortable talking to a person when you book, we do have our 24/7 concierge. You can find the phone number on our website in the Contact Us page. So whatever you're most comfortable with.
And how far out can someone book a seat right now?
We're selling seats through April. So it's quite a long runway there, and we get a lot of bookings. You will save money if you're booking earlier. We dynamically price, but we get a lot of close-in bookings too. And so we've tried. We have terms and conditions to our tickets that allow people to cancel, get credit, transfer the ticket. So people should feel comfortable. They can book even if their travel plans might change.
If they see you in the cockpit, can someone stop you and say hi?
I'd love it.
Awesome, Ben. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Dan. I just want to say thanks again for watching our podcast or listening. If you want to get more information on Ben or Aero, their scheduled service to places like Cabo, Aspen, or Sun Valley, I'll have a link in the show notes here, or you can go to their website, aero.com. Thanks again. I'll see you on the next one.